Vincent, kan die mic iets harder?
Als ik hier ga spreken, is this loud enough? I think so, right? Yeah. People in the back, can you hear me if I speak like this? Is this clear enough?
Beneden, speakersphone.
Ja, maar sorry, dat bedoel ik niet. Dit, ja, maar de andere. Ja, waar wordt deze gedaan? Hier?
Beneden.
Are we live?
Wacht even.
Maar waar staan de boxjes?
Nog een klein beetje.
Hier? Ik kan ze misschien ook dichterbij
Test.
Dit is het Auditorium, de speaker corner is downtown.
Zal het geluid aan?
Ja. Dus dit worden zo, de test. Ik kan alleen niet testen.
Ik ga wel testen.
Kan je ergens... Zou je wat kunnen zeggen?
Oh, oké. Test. Eroverheen gaan. Oké. Moet ik ook zo even tegen die mensen zeggen? Sanna. Ik heb misschien
Sorry about that.
Test for the stream. Testing the stream. Testing the stream.
I just understand that a lot of these things happen because of destination. Just get.
I feel that should be... That should be...
To be honest, I did feel your argument about the prices are rising every year, so it's okay.
very specific for that. And they were looking to go to everything on the key balance. But no, I totally feel like if you want to make and particularly in countries where there's no input, here there are many. It's either crap beers or you get Russian pennies or you get all the rest of it. Yes, you can hear by the names.
In opening opposition, Tel Aviv B. In closing government, LLUM C. And in closing opposition, Leiden C. On the panel with me, I have Imran, Abigail, Daniel, Lewis, Ratib, and Thomas. And without further ado, I'd like to call the Prime Minister to begin the debate.
Testing? Is this too loud? Yeah. Okay. Many of our most fervent followers hide away from us with shame. Many have been torn between two aspects of their humanity. The Pope is in a unique position to bring these lambs back into our fold. It is time to make the Catholic faith more inclusive and more relevant. This is what the Pope aims for, and they have to prove that the Catholic faith is better off shaming and excluding these people who do not meet the requirements from the clergy. We are going to prove that this requirement has always harmed the Catholic faith, while the Pope is in a unique position to change that, and how this benefits the Catholic faith as a whole. What we'll do is simple, that the Pope would publicly declare a statement to abolish the requirement of clerical celibacy, that people in the clergy or any positions of power in the Catholic faith no longer have to abide by this requirement. We would in fact incentivize people who had previously been locked out to now join the clergy after declaring this, and that any scriptures that promote clerical celibacy we would denounce in the same way that the Pope has already denounced scriptures against contraception or scriptures denying global warming. Here's where I enter into my positive contributions. Number one, why is this celibacy harmed the Catholic Church? And then the first thing I will do is explain the principle. The principle is this: that essentially this requirement has artificially excluded people who are Catholic but also don't meet this requirement. So this means that people can be sexually active but at the same time believe in core elements of the Catholic faith. You can believe in marriage, you can believe in the Holy Spirit, but because you do not meet this single requirement, you have carnal desires that are human to all of us, you are therefore less Catholic, and that's principally flawed within what being a Catholic is. So we think that the principle is that a lot of people who are excluded from faith artificially because of this, and that's horrible. That essentially these are people who don't do things that are in opposition with core elements of the Catholic faith, and they genuinely believe in being a good Catholic, but because of this requirement, they are excluded from it. So this is so what does this mean? This harms the capacity for that person to actually exercise that person's Catholicism. That essentially they always have to choose between one or another. That they feel that they cannot be part of the clergy because of this eternal shame that they experience because they have once been sexually active, or because they cannot control themselves from having certain sexual desires. This means that they cannot be fully the person that they want to be. They always have to choose either whether or not they want to experience being part of the clergy, or whether or not they need to suppress their sexual desires. This means that whatever choice you choose, you have to suppress one side or another. But this means that even the people who do end up meeting this requirement and having to suppress their sexual desires and ending up being in the clergy, every day is misery for them. This means that we actively harm our own clergy, and that every prayer for that person prays is tarnished, and every day is standing outside the door of the Lord. We think that it's principally abhorrent that we actively harm these people and suppress their identities. We are against that. But here's where I tell you that the Pope, in particular, is in a unique position to change the way the Catholic faith has been and make the Catholic faith better. Before that, closing.
So why do you think that Pope Francis cares about this particular principle justification?
Yeah, because what he believes in is helping the people within his Catholic faith. If he actively harms and suppresses the people within his own Catholic faith, that's exactly what's principally against what he believes in, and therefore you need to make the Catholic faith better. Even if the Pope is a selfish person and only wants to believe in gaining more followers, here's what I tell more followers, even if you don't care about the principal justification. Why is the Pope essentially important? The Pope right now is the most welcome Pope in recent Catholic history. Not only is he a Latin American gaining that amount of relevance and equity within like the Catholic faith, but like they're essentially the trends of what he accepts and denounces have become increasingly relevant. So, for example, he's accepted contraception. He's denounced any denial on global warming. He's forgiven atheists or like given forgiveness to women for abortion. These are things that increasingly make the Catholic faith more and more relevant, and the Pope has an incentive to do this. He has the capacity to do this because he's the capacity to do this and moderate the Catholic faith and allow the Catholic faith to become more and more acceptable and inclusive to most people, right? This means that he can say controversial things like this, but still be accepted because people literally name their children after him. That people literally feel that he's a person to look up to, and they accept whatever he speaks, right? This means that we may lose the most extreme and most archaic of people, but if those people are willing to force clergymen to suffer, then they're willing to trade that off. If it means that more people who are relevant and equitable join the Catholic faith, and a huge amount of the young that oftentimes go to Protestantism because they have better songs or better games and better communities for them, we now take these people back into the fold that we previously had lost. But here are the benefits of this that essentially from the Pope essentially doing this. That more people that will become moderate Christians, right? People who had originally hated people who they thought had sinned, now they see the Pope moderating himself and therefore also moderate themselves. But the second thing is that more people who used to be alienated, who always thought that, who always fell to the pressures of social norms, where the modern society constantly forces you to be part of being sexually active or being sexually liberated, now can consolidate themselves with their own faith, right? They can be accepted into society as well as not feel that their faith is archaic, because oftentimes a lot of young people feel that their faith is archaic. But here is essentially that you therefore can you create access to religion a lot more, you therefore have a lot more followers. But this also goes in line with the trend that the Pope has always that this particular Pope has always created, which is being newer and more relevant and making the church a place that a lot more of the young and a lot more of the people who are starting to become more secular can enter into. This is a good that they cannot that we feel like we cannot trade off. The more and more you allow the taboos of sex and taboos of consent to entrench themselves, the less and less people you have. But the last thing that we think is essentially important is that a lot of clergymen right now hide the fact that they are sexually active. Meaning that things like STDs, things like problems, things like cannot be solved because they never want to confront their leaders within their clergy. Now they can actually do that, and they can actually solve the problems within the clergy itself.
Kun je hem denk ik hier pakken? Goed even. Kijk, ze lopen een beetje achter. Gewoon even dit. Zet hem wat vol. Zullen we het nou doen? Prima.
So, OGs seem to think that in order to make Christianity more inclusive, the Pope should just make abortion not a sin, because it would open Christianity to more people, and all those restrictions really sort of suck and make people unhappy. We say, crucially, opening government have missed the fact this is an actor motion. They've completely disregarded the incentives of the Pope as a religious Christian, extremely in touch with God, and have not analyzed it. Crucially, also Pope Francis was elected for the purpose of giving the voice of God to the world, and not for the purpose of joining more people to being inclusive to a religion which no longer represents God, because it took a step directly against that belief. Talking about three things. Firstly, what is Pope Francis's conception of Christianity, and why celibacy is necessary to fulfill that conception? Secondly, on the efficacy of clergymen in fulfilling their role, and thirdly, on the Pope's political capital within the Catholic Church, and why we would be wasting it in this case. So, before that, a little bit of rebuttal. So, firstly, we hear about this inclusivity. We completely reject that criteria on its face. Like, inclusivity is not a criteria for a religion. By abolishing all restrictions, you maximize inclusivity. The minute you stray from the Word of God, we are going to be against that. Secondly, clergymen have to choose. Oh no, people in a specific profession have to give up certain things to pursue that profession. We say if your God necessitates celibacy, as we will prove to you, then demanding that from you as a person who is the link between the flock and God is the most basic thing. Thirdly, clergymen will be miserable. Well, they sure don't seem to think so, right? Because they can quit at any point. So given that they completely disagree with opening government, we would say their argument stems mostly from not being clergymen. And lastly, about more moderation. And we're not sure you'll get more moderation because people might stray away from the Pope. We'll talk about that in the third point, because that Pope is already perceived as too liberal maybe by some people. And secondly, we don't see how moderation is a normative value in a debate judged from the perspective of the Pope. Because you don't just want more moderation, you want exactly the right amount of moderation and piety, which God wants, and not more moderation as normative values. Just arguing the debate in a completely irrelevant direction for the analysis of this perspective motion. First, what is the Pope's conception of Christianity? But before that, CJ, I'd like to engage with your extension, if that's what you're asking.
So, would you please explain what about Catholicism mandates this to begin with, maybe from a theological perspective, and why?
Yeah, that's definitely going to be my first point. So, thanks for setting that up. My partner would like to engage with your extension. Okay, so firstly about the Pope's conception of Christianity. So we see that popes along the way, but specifically Pope Francis, have been extremely concerned about attaining spiritual highness, and have maintained that this spiritual highness is mutually exclusive with earthly pleasures. That the more you concentrate on the earthly pleasures of the world, the farther you are from God. We see that directly in Pope Francis's actions. He's done that time and again when he neglected all the fancy clothes that the Pope used to have, all the ceremonial things that he used to have. He neglected the gold cross and started wearing an iron cross in order to show all of Christianity that these earthly pleasures don't matter if even the highest person closest to God to neglect them. He has walked barefoot. He has washed and kissed the legs of poor people. He has done that explicitly to show that the materialistic scale according to which we measure life is not only irrelevant, but actively any engagement with it makes you further away from God. For those reasons, we think that the Pope, that it would be extremely logical for the Pope to require from the clergy, which please notice in Catholicism are the links between the flock and God, not just people who are like organizers, requires from the clergy celibacy. Why? Because sex, family, children, and all those things who can compete with God, causing anxiety in people, and cause those people to think less of God. I'll talk about that more in my second point. But B, because especially we know that these materialistic concerns and earthly pleasures, which stem from having a family, which stem from having sex with your wife, which stem from looking at various women and considering which one might be the best wife, are ones which directly contradict the spiritual, which are ones in which you directly engage and interact with the material world in a way which is mutually exclusive with attaining the highest spiritual level. Without those people attaining the high spiritual level, they cannot be effective clergymen as a link between the flock and God, but also it would be a sin for the Pope to say to the people who specifically requested to be as close to God as possible that they should do something which the Pope knows and applies on himself, because he knows that that makes you lower spiritually and farther from God. Therefore, principally alone, the Pope cannot and should not do that to his clergymen. Secondly, on the efficacy of clergy, we say that particularly the work of clergymen requires a lot of time. Merely handling the flock, all of their concerns, being attentive to all the people, requires a lot of time. That can oftentimes be mutually exclusive with having a family, because a family is always prioritized, even because of the biological incentives, extremely high in one's own perspective. Secondly, we say that once you have a family, and everyone who has a family probably knows that, you have significantly less time for introspection. Every waking moment which is not spent in the work of the flock is spent in the work of the family and the concerns of the family. We say specifically this type of introspection is crucial for attaining a high level of spirituality, which can oftentimes only be attained when studying alone, when thinking alone, when looking into one's soul. It is crucial that when a father comes back from his flock, he has nothing but God with him in the house. He has nothing but Jesus with him in the house. Thirdly, and my partner will extend on this, we say the Pope has limited political capital. This Pope has already displayed certain aspects of policy which seem liberal to some members. We say that this is extremely wasteful because people care because people care very deeply about it. It's a fundamental principle to many people. It's very personal. It also applies directly to my sons and daughters, so I find it like to be a personal offense. We say that given that, wasting the Pope's limited political capital on such a thing would be wasteful when the alternative is him revolutionizing the approach of the Christian community to gays. If that makes clergymen in the field apply less his orders because they now have more doubt that he is an accurate representation of God, that alone is reason to oppose. Thanks.
Spend the rest of your life with her, or even if it's just a one-night fling, like the fact that you have a individuals. According to them, clergymen have limited time. And because of limited time, you can't have a family, you can't do other things. Like the first thing I'm going to say is, I will agree that maybe you're going to have more limited time in our. I will say two things to this. The first is the quality of the time you spend in the church will be significantly better. In a world where your sexual desires are actualized, when you no longer fear talking about the one you love the most in the world, the time you spend in church will be spent more meaningfully. But the second thing is, I don't understand why having a family and being a clergyman means you have less time. Rather, this clergyman incorporate the family into the structures of the church. They are more likely to bring a family in the name of the Catholic faith, often showing what a good Catholic family can look like. Time is not exclusive, but your love for a person is, I don't know why that's part of this debate. But the third thing, and this is literally, he said there was no problem in this world, because apparently clergymen are not happy. How on earth do you know that? There's a taboo in the Catholic Church right now. No one speaks about sex. Even if a clergyman in your world does have sex or has a wife that he loves, he can't marry her. He's supposed to keep quiet about it. He has an STD, or when consent is a problem, he can't speak to his fellow members about it. So you harm clergymen, and on top of that, you don't allow them to actualize the best version of their Catholic faith. But the second part of this debate is about followers. Note there was literally no response up until now about the types of followers you get in our. There are a lot of people within status quo who have sexual desires, who have a family, who are loving individuals, but choose not to opt into the Catholic faith because of this barrier. People with expertise, people who care about the Catholic faith, loyal individuals that you lose in your world. If this means in your world, you continue isolating these people, you make the Catholic faith more extreme, you make it more archaic. Only the most conservative people are going to opt into your world, at which point you lose the millennials, you lose the most moderate people, and you lose liberal Catholics. This is not in the incentive of the Catholic Church. Before I go on, go for it.
So not becoming married is actually not a requirement for followers of Catholicism, and celibacy is a core part of Christianity.
Yeah, so like the first is, in order for you to be principally consistent, you wouldn't allow followers to, right? Because they are unclean in the eyes of God. But the second thing is, what clergymen do often are received by the people as like a word from God. Therefore, you incentivize them as well. But the third is, if I'm a follower and I have sexual desires, but all my clergymen say is a bad thing, you feel like a sinner. Even though the Catholic faith adopts you as part of their church, every day you feel like you sin because you're sitting in the sermon being preached by people who don't believe that your wife is a valuable part of your life. So I think the second part of my speech, we've already proven why you get more followers, you get better types of followers, and on top of that, you don't disenfranchise the Catholic faith. Last issue in this debate is about what the Pope should do moving into the future. Like, I don't think there's enough analysis in the opening opposition why the Pope should remain stagnant when times are moving. The Pope isn't just a messenger, and I've said this in my opening line, because it's important to note that the Pope can massively restructure the way the Catholic faith is viewed in the future. It isn't just a mediator between one person and God, it often shapes the way people interact with God in this world. And look, the reason why we continuously change popes, or we don't have one pope for the doctrines, is because we want the Pope to be able to nuance the messages of his doctrine to be relevant in status quo. Otherwise, you wouldn't need a Pope. Otherwise, you would just follow the Bible word per word. Note at this point, the open opposition hasn't proven to me why the Pope should be a puppet to past doctrines, but rather be the enabler of future doctrines that are preferable to people. If we include more individuals in our Catholic faith, the Pope is inevitably going to be the biggest legacy maker that we have seen to today. And that means in the open opposition, they doom the Pope. They doom the Pope to a legacy that is not only harmful to him, but counterproductive to the things he has done in the past. I would invite the deputy leader of opposition to give me a good reason why earthly desires doesn't make you less of a Catholic. Because I don't believe you having earthly desires means you're maximizing what there is on this earth, and therefore you're in a better position than you previously were. I'm supremely proud to propose.
process to test out clergy before they get into role, and what it means they are going to do a better job. Thirdly, more political capital with a little engagement we got from OG. Before that, 2 points of their concerns about the rest is going to be integrated. Firstly, the answer our case, Non's case, when he tells you wait, this actually harms his ability to function as a pope by saying, but he might be more into it when he's there, right? He might be more spiritual when there. Here's a question of which is a more likely scenario when you have kids. Are you going to take more time into there than comparatively when you are a deep follower of God, believe you're living His word, you already think that you're representing the community and have an extremely important role, which don't notice the delta of I have a family at home that should get back to in those terms. But moreover, they don't answer directly everything else we've already told you. But the fact that you are going to be, in your mind at least, preoccupied with your family, with your child at home who is sick, with your wife, with your Yashodhan, with the fight that you had with her, with what she's going to say when you spend a lot of time in the church, which is your obligation and it's your duty as a clerical, as a clerk. We say all these things are not required. Why is this crucial? Because the moment that we show there is a crucial harm to your ability to function as a clerical, like as a pastor in the church, that means it is a relevant criteria to discriminate by. At that point, OG loses the debate, since they do agree with us when not answering my partners. When my partner tells them, are you for abolishing the sin of an abortion? That means that they do prioritize religiousness to an extent over inclusivity. We say that when we accept this is something that is going to lead to better clerks, we win the debate as well. Secondly, note that just analysis on inclusivity is weird. Here's what they tell us. I am going to see that the clergy, that there is clerical celibacy, therefore I am going to be pushed away from the church. Note that under status quo, you can still not have sex before you're married, and that doesn't change. And by OG's analysis, that seems like the more crucial burden for being closer to the church. Secondly, who on the right might say, well, do I want to do religion or not? It depends on whether the pastor is having sex tonight. We just think that is ludicrous to change anybody's appeal towards the church. No thank you. I'll take you later in order to engage. First, on the principle. None gives you specifically what OO means. He tells you what is the Pope's interpretation of the Bible by the evidence that we have. This is a motion where we are the Pope. We should analyze by what we know what that Pope thinks and believes. When that Pope says every single time and in every single action says spirituality and afterlife are more important than your current well-being. When he takes off the golden cross, when he kisses the feet of, no thank you, Adjudicators, let's say, and when he kisses the feet of the poor people, when he says no to the use of condoms in Africa, even though AIDS exists. That specifically means that specific Pope thinks that spirituality is more important than desires, and more importantly, that satisfying desires is actually a sinful act. That caring more for your health than your Christian spirituality, like the example with condoms and AIDS, is more important. You should prioritize spirituality over your entire physical well-being. What does that mean? That means that that Pope specifically, when he says, no, you specifically, the person with the clergy, who are supposed to be the representation of my voice and God's voice to the people, who are supposed to lead the community, no, you can actually just give up to your desires. You can give up to your sexual desires. You can get married. This is in direct contradiction to his interpretation. The Pope's duty is to interpret and to deliver the message of God. This is a direct stab to his interpretation, it is in contradiction to it, and it is therefore principally wrong for him to do. Before I move on, OG.
So the Pope has come out in favor of contraception with the rise of Zika, forgiven women for abortion, and allowed more women to be involved in the Pope.
Sit down.
Tell me how it's not the same.
Thank you, Sam. That's a lie. I'm sorry. Like, we all live in the real world, I guess. He literally said the thing I just said. He's against abortion. His stance on gays is very, very lopsided. He never said, well, gays are okay. He said, maybe don't stone them. This is, again, an interpretation of the Bible and in complete consistency with what we just told you. Secondly, on the idea of why it is actually, or actually, I'm going to switch the point. Thirdly, political capital. Because here's what we tell you. There is going to be some backlash for that. Some clergy don't believe this is the right interpretation of the Bible. Some people think that celibacy is the right thing, meaning you are going to get some sort of political opposition to that act. Oh, tell us, oh, but you're also going to get more people. Here's a crucial differentiation. A, we've answered the more people, but secondly, these are the people who don't yet have political power inside the system of the church. They don't yet have the cardinal who would vote for the next pope. They don't have the people who lead communities. They are new members of it. What does that mean? That means that this is an extremely pricey move for no good reason. If you think that the Pope should just invest in his own interpretation, in things that are actually important, like gays, like the porn society, this is an extremely stupid move. It is very costly in terms of political capital and gains almost nothing. On the basis of merely this point, we should also win the debate. But thirdly, what do we tell them? We say that this is actually a great litmus test to make sure that your clergy is the one that can function as what they are supposed to be. Why? Because we say that specifically the people of the clergy have three main roles that are tested magnificently through this mechanism. A, they have to devote themselves to the community. They have to be able to put their desires aside and everything else except sexuality, according to OG, in order to treat the community, in order to be able to care for them. Secondly, they have to give up on other important areas of their life in order to serve God. We say this is a perfect litmus test in order to test specifically those two criteria. Why is that? A, because people do care about sex. We accept that. The idea that you are now being able to say, here's a person who was able to give up on a major part of every human being's life in order to serve God and in order to serve the community, means that you are more likely to get under our side of the house clerks who are going to be better at their jobs. Clerks who will be able to represent God correctly, even when it is in some contention with their personal desires, who are able to put themselves aside from the equation and just do their job. Moreover, you are going to get clerks who are better able to serve the community, who are able to sacrifice from themselves for other people. It is principally wrong, it leads to bad consequences, and it is a stupid move in terms of political power. Please oppose the motion.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. Is this too loud? Okay. No problem. What defines Catholicism? It was never about irrational sacrifices. It was always about love. And 21st century has progressed, and our understanding of those things have also changed. It's about time the Pope makes those acknowledgements. Those are the arguments we will be running today. But before that, something that doesn't quite fit in. This side draws a parallel. It says the Pope has given up a lot of things, therefore the Catholic Church must be about getting rid of excesses. Yes. The Catholic Church is about getting rid of excesses, especially if you're serving as one of the people who is supposed to serve the flock, right? But it's never about something that's supposed to be about giving up your identity. This is where we make the distinction. There are 4 key features. Number 1, when you want a family, it's immutable, sexuality. Number 2, it's existential to you, often your sexual and gender identity. Number 3, it's not just part of your identity, but you don't gain happiness upon exclusion of those things. So that's why this is not simply a matter of sacrifice, but this is a matter of sacrificing something that is not just not harmful, but existential to your identity. And these are all modern concepts of what love is that we have come to figure out. This is why Catholic Church, this is why Pope has a mandate to make this happen. The first reason why the Pope has a mandate to make this happen is you literally just have to consider the context of Catholicism. What's the context in which Catholicism came into place? It was an alliance between an empire and a group of people who wanted to preach a religion. It was a matter of integrating a lot of factor that doesn't really make sense. So for example, this whole tradition of celibacy literally comes from the communes that used to exist back then, where people used to preach, walk around. This is literally an inherited tradition. That's not part of the New Testament. Secondly, often it's about the council that made a lot of these decisions, and especially codified a lot of these other things. But thirdly, it was a time when these people ran an empire, and to run an empire you had to show that you were morally superior to the layman, to the flock, and this is what led to that repressive identity, i.e. if you had to be part of the ruling class, you had to be morally superior, and therefore you could not satisfy love with another human being, or you couldn't have family. We tell you those are all vestiges of a Catholic Church that was more concerned with building an empire and less concerned with propagating love. Therefore, the Pope must give it up. But the second reason is the Catholic Church now preaches in a global village where the concepts are so vast, right? It's no longer just the communes that want to embrace Catholicism, but often very sexually open societies, often tribal communities that preach a lot of open sexual behavior. Like in a lot of communities like Hinduism, you can literally pray to sexual organs. These are communities that are very open to sexuality, and family is intrinsic to what is part of their identity. They do not make a separation in terms of if you have a family, you cannot therefore serve God. Catholic Church becomes irrelevant, not just because it's a vestige of the empire, but also because you cannot penetrate all these people, because you're telling these people you must sacrifice something that is fundamental to their identity if you want to serve God. The third reason why Catholic Church must make this change, and the Pope must make this change, is because this is also a vestige of a very old distinction that is being made. So in Catholicism, there's two kinds of love, right? First, there's the concept of eros, which is love that you have for a human being, and there's the concept of agape, which is basically love that transcends and love that essentially connects you to God and Jesus. The old Catholic Church used to believe they have to be mutually exclusive. That theological distinction was important when you wanted to maintain a monopoly. But right now, it is not important not simply because you don't have an empire, but also because it's probably extremely extreme, right? But the second reason you must get rid of that is because, listen, this tells you that if you want to serve God, this is what the debate is about. People who serve God in the highest levels. That delineation tells people if you want to serve God in the highest level, you cannot also serve human beings, and you cannot have a family, and you cannot love human beings. That is why the Catholic Church must get rid of this distinction. Right? So the third thing is, right, we tell you this is about the important, this is about the crisis that the Catholic Church is facing in the 21st century. This is about the fact that families are breaking up. This is about the fact that people are losing faith in family. And all these people are flocking to the church, but they have no advice. Fathers literally have no experience in terms of being able to help these people, right? Because fathers never exercise love in a way that these people want to exercise love, right? In a way that these people want to exercise love. Therefore, what it means is you literally exclude something that the Catholic Church is supposed to serve to, and Catholic Church is irrelevant because they cannot serve all these things, right? And secondly, we tell you, like, literally every other sect of Catholicism can literally do it. You can go to your family and you can also go to the parish. Everyone else is doing, like, even ER doctor has a family, and that person is probably doing something that is extremely critical. So we tell you essentially this is a question of mischaracterization. So firstly, what we have told you so far is when you look at the context under which these dogmas came into place and the core theology of Catholicism, this is extremely important. But finally, this is also about the crises that the Catholic Church faces. Look at it this way. The Catholic Church must get rid of it, not because, see, here's the thing. This debate is not about more subscription. This debate is not about getting a bigger house. But this debate is about recognizing that the Catholic house is the house of love. And in that house of love, you must be able to accommodate people for whom it's critical to have a family and also critical to be able to serve God, right? What the Catholic Church does is it forces you to make that distinction. And that is essentially against the core theology of Catholicism. But finally, right, the reason Catholic Church must do it is not simply because they are pedophiles. Because look at it this way. People commit sexual transgressions because it's opposed to human nature. This is a massive problem in the Catholic Church and an open secret, right? Because firstly, you're tagged as a deviant if you're studying in a theological seminary, if you want to have a family. Secondly, you put yourself to this constant feeling of self-loathing, right? You think you're not part of the Catholic supremacy because you cannot serve God, you also cannot have a family. And you also cannot have a family, right? So essentially what this failure to understand human nature does is, it means all this new generation of people who want to serve the Catholic Church literally cannot gain entry into the Catholic Church. So the house of God says, we are not going to accept you because your concept of love is more in tune with what humanity believes in anyway, right? And we're going to hold on to the vestiges of the Catholic Empire. That's what's extremely wrong. But finally, this is also extremely important because the Catholic Church is going through a crisis. There are two groups of people that the Catholic Church needs to serve in this case. And both of these group of people have to do with being able to attract more clergy, right? And this is what the Pope has to be concerned about. The first problem in terms of attracting clergy is the fact that people are going to years of studies in theological seminaries, often by using money from donation. And then these people go through an exodus because they literally want a family. What it means is the transformed concept of being able to hold God and family and all sorts of love together is something the Catholic Church doesn't recognize. In the end, the Catholic Church is the one that loses out. But secondly, what it also does is, so for example, when Boston Globe came up with an expose, it was found 1 in 5 people is literally like having sexual practices or wants a sort of family. You literally have to send these people into $1 million places to fix them. This is not the time when Catholic Church does something like this. If Catholicism is about love, this debate is not about making the house bigger. It's about redefining love so that it can accommodate everyone.
Dear audience, there is a very good reason that we ask priests and the clergy to give up all of their worldly possessions. And that is because it's a policy that is necessary to provide millions of followers with a fulfilling religious experience. Pope Francis is a person who has devoted his entire life to giving people that fulfilling religious experience. Implementing a policy which harms that religious experience is clearly not in his interest. 2 things in his speech. First, I'm going to take the government bench at its best and explain, even if priests do not change in any particular way, that this policy undermines the perception of authority and undermines the ability of the priest to be a link because people don't no longer see him as a particular religious authority. Second, I'm going to talk and explain why this makes priests less able to guide people within their religion, because the struggle of giving up sex brings them closer to God. Before that, rebuttal to the gov bench. So, on closing government. First thing I want to note, they gave us some reasons why this potentially is in line with theology. Even if this is true, they need to explain why this particular interpretation is adhered to by Pope Francis. So even if there exists an alternative form of why we could possibly explain through scripts and everything, that is possibly not the one which he adheres to and not in his interest. All gave good reasons why that's not the interpretation he follows. Second, they said, this is different because it's a fundamental part of your identity. The church asks you constantly to give up fundamental parts of your identity. For example, if I want to become a religious follower, they might ask me to give my fundamental identity of being a secular person, for example. We think that sacrifices are sometimes necessary, and even though some people of these priests need to give up, look, take them at their best, right? Even if some priests need to give up some part of their identity, I will show you why for millions of people, a key part of their identity, mainly their religion, it becomes far worse. Lastly, they said priests don't understand love because they don't have sex. Look, most important consideration in this debate is that priests understand God, and that they understand it better and provide that key benefit. They can have talks about sex and love to other people. So, let's talk about opening government. Opening government says this makes religion accessible. I want to note a factual thing here, that celibacy only applies to the clergy. So this is not about young people who think abortion is abhorrent and still want to join religious. This is about people who want to join the clergy, so this is not about getting mass followers under their side. That's not a benefit they can claim. They don't also get better priests. Why? Because clearly, if you were unwilling to become a priest before this policy, it was not the most important thing in your life. You were not even willing to give up sex for it, right? So therefore, you're clearly not fit and not good as a priest, because it's not the most important thing, you don't have that amount of devotion. Those will not priests we necessarily want within the clergy. So, point is substantive. Why abolishing this celibacy damages the religious experiences of many, and why Pope Francis cares deeply about that. I want to examine a bit more clearly what exactly is the function of a priest. Followers recognize that they do not have perfect knowledge about what religious doctrine is and which particular things they should follow. Why is that important? Because the priest has the experience and knowledge in many instances to guide them and provide them in that following. If followers do not believe that they can fulfill that religion to the fullest extent, that is the difference between heaven and hell for them. Because they believe that they need that authority within their life. That is why, for example, you need to trust a priest to the fullest extent when you make a confession or when they preach. So, here's the point in this debate. At the point where a policy undermines the position of a priest, and where they become less credible, less trustable, have less authority, you're less able to follow them, you're less able to believe them, and less likely to get the fulfilling religious experience, but also believe you're more likely to end up in a place of doom and hell when you follow them in that instance. So therefore, that is the harder day commitment there at the house. So here's what I want to explain. Opening opposition explains, this makes priests less able because of the because they have less time and everything. I want to explain that even if priests do not change, the perception of priests change. And that already is enough to make sure that they're less able to fulfill the role. What is the perception is harder than there are some doubts. First, you tell to all of the followers that the primary concern of the priest is not their religion, but that they also have other interests which are exceptionally important to them. That makes them less able to, for example, give you that particular religious fulfillment. Because apparently, they don't think that God is the most important, or that religion is not the most important, but that sex is more important. So therefore, why would you trust someone to guide you to heaven at the point where that's not the most important thing for them? We think they want someone who's completely and utterly devoted, they're more likely to trust those people. Second of all, you undermine the authority of a particular priest. Why? It is harder to take someone serious, to know that someone is following religious doctrine, at the point where they're constantly undermining that religious doctrine. It seems as if priests are simply not unsure what is particularly happening. Because one hand, some time ago, the Pope said this, and now he says something else. So therefore, it doesn't clearly look across as if those priests are knowledgeable and know what they are doing. We think that therefore you undermine their particular authority. But also, you're more likely to trust someone to be an authority on religion at the point where they have devoted more time and more effort into it. They create a perception that priests don't do that and don't have that interest at heart. Why does Pope Francis care about this? Pope Francis is a person who has devoted his life and sacrificed everything in order to become like a pope, in order to give the people a fulfilling religious experience. That's why he's wanted to become a pope in the first place. At the point where policy makes that less able to do so, that is his primary interest. Therefore, this is a policy he will not support. Why is this struggle important for a priest to fulfill their job? We think that giving up sex is a struggle. We think lots of people will go through hard times. Why are those having a hard time and going through a struggle particularly important? When you go through a particular struggle, you reflect on why it is so important for you, why you were willing to give up sex. That makes you reflect on why religion is important to you. And therefore, it makes you more critically think about what and why that religion is important. Therefore, you become more devoted to that particular religion because you clearly thought about why that is important. Okay.
When your clergymen are more archaic and less relatable to you, give me one good reason why people are more likely to trust and respect their authority rather than undermine them and see the Catholic Church as less relevant.
Look, they're more likely to distrust them at the point where they give a clear statement and clearly show that they do not have the religious interest of you at heart. We think, therefore, you're making it uncomparative. Look, more importantly, at the point where you are going through a particular struggle, you're far more likely to find support in God, right? Praying and everything that you do within the church keeps you going through. So therefore, you understand better why that particular support of God is so important for people who go through a particular struggle. That creates a stronger devotion to that particular religion. That is why you need to give up all worldly possessions, because you need to go through that struggle to understand why that support of God is so important and why that religion is so important. And therefore, those priests get a better understanding, and therefore makes them better able to fulfill that role, but also they become more devoted, they become more motivated to further better themselves as particular priests. This is a struggle which is important for priests to give up in order to make them best able to fulfill that role. But even if nothing changes, the perception that they are less able already damages faith. Pope Francis, strangely enough, giving the head of the Catholic Church, cares about faith. That's why you vote off.
It is quite sad that all of the analysis given by Shita was ignored by the side of closing opposition, right? So I'll bring that into today's debate and talk about the issues that are most relevant to today's debate. Firstly, they wanted to contend on this idea of how they will have a lower quality of priests, or people wouldn't believe in priests anymore. Shita told you extensively why this wouldn't happen and why under status quo this is extremely problematic when these people like priests or fathers spend long amount of time in seminary schools going there and getting this sort of education, and that education is wasted when these people decide that, or like the priesthood is not something that is very important, or because priesthood cannot coexist with them having a family and these people leave the church. This means this is an extreme amount of cost, and also the image that people like see of the church is also extremely bad. It should explain, right? So we think these sort of things happen. Secondly, we also told you that the point in time which fathers or priests involved in these sort of devious behaviors, they are sent to like camps where the church spends millions of dollars trying to reform these people, right? This is also principally against the sort of things Pope Francis is advocating for. If money should be used to help the poor people, then why should millions of dollars be spent to make do a PR campaign, right? So we also think on a principle level, this is something that is very harmful. So does it really impact, does it really have an impact on the followers? We don't think so, right? So a couple of reasons why this isn't necessarily true. We think the fact that they go to seminary schools for years, and the fact that they also decide to live a relatively poorer life necessarily means that people believe in them. Firstly, because they have the knowledge of God, they study the various versions of Bible, the fact that they decide to give up the wealth, and like all of these things means people still trust others or priests, and we also tell you that they are more relatable, right? The side of open opposition wanted to come here and tell you that the point in time which they have families, people will think they are weird or they are not relatable or whatever, right? Shita came here and told you that people are not able to relate and talk about the problems that they are facing in the century, like people go through divorces and all these sort of problems, and they're not able to relate to these things and tell to the father or the priest because they don't understand the dynamics of love or sex or whatever is involved in family life. So we think this is extremely important in terms of family life, and we reject the characterization that was brought by opening opposition, right? Secondly, we told you on a principle level why Pope Francis should do it. It's like there were like 2 or 3 principles that Shita talked to you about. Firstly, Shita told you that there were 2 concepts of love previously, which was the love for human beings and love for God. And Pope Francis has rejected this principle and has followed New Testament and said like love for God and love for human beings can coexist. This necessarily means you don't have to now just like love God or love human beings. You can do both things, right? So we think that this also goes together with his core principle of giving up. This doesn't like alienate his core principle of like not having to go with material things, because like love and sex and all of these things are something that is very natural to people, and this is something important for their existence, and all these sort of analysis given by Shita. It differentiates from the material wealth, because you can just give up material wealth and have a relatively happy life or relatively normal life. So we don't think this contradicts the fundamental principles of Catholicism. Secondly, Shita also told you that these priests and he also told you that these people are supposed to serve to people, and the fact that they no longer can serve to people because they can't relate to these people means that this is also on a principle level something that is very harmful, and the Pope should take into consideration, right? If you are supposed to serve the followers of Catholicism and you can't do it anymore because you can't relate to these people, even if you know whatever is in the Bible, that means that on a principle level the Pope should be supporting these sort of things, right? Opening.
So just to be clear, if I believe in Shiva and this is a core part of my identity and I want to be a clergyman, should the Pope let me be that without renouncing my belief? Christianity is about love for humans. That's not equal to love for a specific wife.
No, but we already told you, right? Like the sort of beliefs have changed and evolved over the years. This necessarily means the Pope can now take a stand considering the facts that are in this 21st century and the fact that his belief is different from that, and he considers that love for human beings and love for God can coexist, right? So we don't think like
you have to go into that specific narrative. If you want to go into a different narrative, which has all these practical benefits that Shisha talked about, we think as Pope Francis, we should do it, right? So now I'm going to go into the practical reasons why you need to do it, right? Firstly, we told you that there is so much of crisis going on due to the sexual aggression happening within the Catholic Church. They have to spend millions of dollars, trying to reform these people. Secondly, we told you that there's a lot of self-loath among these priests that lead to them leaving the church and all of these things which are extremely harmful to the church. The fact that you can't also relate to the newer generation of younger youths also means this is a practical harm that is caused towards the Catholic Church when you don't understand the basic human nature. On another level, Shita also told you that when you want to penetrate into newer developing countries, and when these countries' cultures, tribal cultures, be it Vajrayana Buddhism or other sorts of cultures or tribal cultures within these regions, rely on sexualization or praying to sexual organs, means that these people find Catholicism something that is very weird, right? So that the point that at that point in time, we think it is extremely important as Pope Francis, because one of his goals is also to make sure that most amount of people actually follow Catholicism. So we think at this point in time, it is extremely important for him to change this archaic view and to have a new interpretation so that he will be able to get more followers in developing nations who view sexualization of sex as something that is extremely important. And the fact that you deviate from this will mean that you will not be able to get that amount of followers at the end of the day. So what have we told you in today's debate? Firstly, we told you on a principle level the interpretation of Pope regarding Catholicism has changed, and two can exist together, love for human beings and love for God. This necessarily means it has deviated from the earlier interpretations of Catholicism, and this means when all the practical benefits that exist with it, that you will be able to curb the sort of sexual aggression that is happening within the church, you will be able to stop the amount of people who are leaving the Catholic Church because they can no longer have a family. Thirdly, we also told you the fact that you will be able to penetrate into developing countries and get more followers necessarily means this is something that is in the best interest of Pope Francis to do. For all these reasons, I think we're proud to oppose.
Responsible for millions of religious people all around the world. Flores explains to you why for all those people, their religious experience becomes much less fulfilling. We think that on that metric, that is something that the Pope finds incredibly important. One, because he has devoted his life to that experience, but secondly, because he has experienced that experience and knows how important that is, plus the authority that he has. I think that for that reason, this metric is the most important one in the debate and the one that's going to win us this round. I'm going to talk about three things. Firstly, what does the Pope care about? Secondly, why does celibacy matter? And thirdly, what happens to the religious experience? So let's look firstly at what the Pope cares about. We heard from OG that he cares about inclusivity. First of all, we didn't hear any reason why that's true, or why he cares about that more than about other things, right? So we think that is my first response. But secondly, we think that inclusivity is contingent on what happens to the religious experience of people who are religious, right? Because you can also change the Catholic doctrine to saying you can go to heaven regardless, and probably you will get more followers, but that is not something that is in the interest of the Pope. Why not? Because the religious belief, the religious experience of the people who are part of the church has to be as good as possible. So that's why inclusivity heavily depends and is contingent on Flores' analysis on what happens to this religious experience, when you have to give up such worldly things. He explains that it's important and essential to be able to guide people to God, and he explains to you that this is perceived as best. Thirdly, he says that he impacts this, which was lacking in the first half. He explains that this is extremely important to these millions of people because this means the difference between heaven and hell. This means the difference between going to a nice place for eternity or burning in hell forever. We think that is an impact that is incredibly important. Therefore, even if hell and heaven don't exist, the perception of people that they're more scared that the guidance that they get to heaven is less good and less perfect. I think that fear in itself is enough to win us a debate of a heart. So what does Flores tell you? Flores explains to you that what the Pope cares about is his religious experience because that is something that he has devoted his life to. No, thank you. So let's look at why celibacy matters. So here, first half, they talk about time, they talk about the possibility to be introspective, and then that's important for a priest. But Flores is much more detailed than that. He explains to you that the struggle to give up these things that we as mortal beings are unable to give up is extremely important because that is a struggle in which you find God. Why is this also important? Because if you look at, for example, the prophet Jesus, that was also the one that suffers to a great extent for the greater good. We think these things are extremely important, specifically in Catholicism, because that shows that you are able to sacrifice yourself for others. We think that therefore this fits perfectly in the doctrine. So we hear from OG, given that harms the church because then you have less priests. But I just don't understand why you would want priests who are apparently not devoted enough to God to be able to do that. We think that that is problematic. We don't think that we want it, like, also there's not a shortage of priests, so we don't understand why this is super important and we have to make the job more attractive. We don't think that that is something that we have to do. You need good priests, we get the best. And then this point that OG and CG both do about coercion. So let's firstly respond to CG's point about this. We think that the assumption of their argument is incredibly problematic because they say that basically people who don't find earthly love with another person are unable to fulfill themselves. We think that there are many different ways to fulfill yourself. We think that a very good alternative is religion. We think that loving God and being able to find that love is incredibly important. But also the people that we talk about are people who usually become interested in becoming a priest because they got a message from God, right? This is something that they feel inside themselves, the calling of God. These are not people that don't want to do that because the people who don't really want it, who are felt to be coerced, we filter them out because the suffering of celibacy is too difficult, right? So those bad priests that they talk about exist on their side of the house, not on ours. Then they say you need to understand what sex is, otherwise you cannot love. We think that that is very problematic. There are a lot of people who are in happy sexless marriages. We don't think this is actually a comprehensive claim to make. This is something that is necessary. Plus you can love your family members and your parents who you don't have sex with. We think that a similar relationship, like most often, we think that a similar relationship can happen between you and God. We don't understand why knowing what sex is and what it is like and having experiences is necessary for guiding people to heaven. They have not given us any metric to believe that. So let's look at then thirdly at the religious experience. But first, a POI from second half.
The Catholic tradition tells people not to have sex if they're going to be priests. But the New Testament says you can have a family, you can love, and you can serve God. Why must the Pope therefore follow the vestiges of an old institution?
Because we need a Pope, because what was written in the Bible is not something that we all take literally, because it's not something that we're able to take literally, right? There's a reason we need someone to interpret it for us. That's what this debate is about, whether or not you should interpret it in this way. Flores explains to you that interpreting it in your way makes the religious experience of millions of people around the world so much more problematic. That's why we win. So let's look at that religious experience and what happens. So what we did here in extension was taking proposition at their best and saying even if celibacy makes it more difficult for priests to become priests, which we don't think is true, but even if that's the case, then the perception of the fact that
Very close, we didn't have all the things.
Okay, thank you for helping.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to go this way?